I get a.
All right, so here we are with one of my best friends, Ricardo Lopez, and he comes from like kind of a very similar experience growing up in LA and coming to Mexico and really kind of starting his life over, but never forgetting where he's from. So, Richard, tell us a little bit about you and where you're from and how you ended up in the States and how you came back.
Okay, hi. Nice meeting you. As Rick said, my name is Ricardo Lopez, and originally I was born here in Mexico, but I was brought up in South LA. I'm a Sureño, and I was taken to the States when I was a little kid for the first time. I don't know, I must have been like probably 4 or 5 years old, and initially, my parents were going through some economical issues, and we were bouncing back and forth. Like we're going to the States, but my mom never really liked the States, so she always wanted to come back to Mexico. So every time she would want her to come back, I came back with her, and my dad stayed over there. But I didn't feel comfortable here, so I had to choose. It was a hard decision for me to make. I was only a little kid growing up in Mexico, and then I was like, I didn't feel comfortable here, and so my dad calls my mom, and he says that I should be back with them in the States. So I went back with them, and my whole family was there, and I was doing fine. But a couple of sisters of mine, the oldest one and the youngest ones, weren't able to adapt. They were so used to being here in Mexico that they weren't able to adapt that easily to the life in the United States. But since I was, like a middle child, I adapted right away. So I liked it over there. And so I was brought up basically in the United States. And then next thing you know, I was kind of thrown off. Because as I was saying, I was, moving back and forth. Then my family decides to move back to Mexico, and so I started school here. Like I believe it was 5th grade, and it was really hard for me to adapt because I didn't know how to read in Spanish, and I didn't know how to my Spanish was alright because I spoke Spanish.
I didn't know that about you.
You didn't know that?
Back and forth. I thought you were just in the States.
No, I was here at the beginning, and I was back and forth.
Back and forth. Okay,
yeah, the first few years of my life.
Okay.
So then all of a sudden, my mom and dad said that we were gonna stay here in Mexico, so they put me in school here, in a public school, and so the teacher goes up to my parents telling them that I was a little bit slow and that I didn't know how to read, and I was already probably 10, 11 years old, and I didn't really know how to read. And then my mom was called up, and they thought I was kind of, I had ADD or something.
Yeah.
So the teachers found out that my English was better than my Spanish back then.
Yeah.
So then I explained myself to the teacher. I'm like, you know what? I don't know how to read because I'm a little bit slow because I was living in the States, and all of a sudden
that's like something that's really hard for us. When we come back, everybody thinks like, "Porque no hablas español?" Well, I was taught in English.
Right.
Yeah.
And good thing that you mentioned that. Look at my last name. My last name is Lopez.
Yeah.
Even up to today, people criticize me because there's still a couple of words out there that I don't know how to use in Spanish. I've already been living here for 20 plus years, so I believe my Spanish is pretty good now because I'm surrounded. I'm in an environment where everybody speaks Spanish, but back then my Spanish wasn't that good, and I felt that I was caught in the middle. Because, well, Rick, you've been through that. I mean, we're not, fully accepted in the United States because we're not Caucasian.
Yeah.
Yet, we're not fully Mexican. We're caught in the middle.
So nobody likes us.
Nobody likes us.
But us.
Exactly. So I'm glad I ran into Rick. That's why he's one of my best homies right now. So, because we understand each other.
Yeah.
And as it is, it's already hard. For us to be caught in the middle, and on top of that, having a very Mexican last name, you know, Lopez. My last name is Lopez, and that's probably the most Mexican last name you could think of.
You to be super Mexican.
Exactly. They expect you to speak like Spanish very fluently. And next thing you know, when I just got a job here, you know, they forced me to speak English the whole time. So to make matters worse, there wasn't room for me to improve my Spanish, right?
Okay, but tell us a little bit about your life in LA.
Okay. So then, I lived here when I was in 5th and 6th grade. I graduated from an elementary school when I was here, and I told my parents that I couldn't adapt here. And my dad and the whole family decided to go back to the States. So afterwards, we stayed in the States for quite a bit.
And you're in South LA.
And then I went back to the very same place where I was brought up, South LA.
Where in South? So South Central LA.
South Central, San Pedro Street and Florence.
Okay, all right. So tell us a little bit how that was growing up and how that was different from Mexico.
It was pretty different because, I mean, to me, that was my life, you know, like South LA, that's where I felt comfortable. And here in Mexico, I liked it, but there was something in me that I wasn't able to adapt that easily. So whenever I went back to the States, I felt like, man, this is where I feel comfortable. So I went back to normal, you know, I went to middle school and high school and...
So in LA, is it different growing up? Is it different, like, because in South LA, it's like half Mexican, half black.
Right.
Now it's almost all Mexican, but back in that time, it was almost half black. Was it difficult growing up with
people who what, I'm sorry?
From a different culture, different race?
Well, not really, because I was already used to, you know, like hanging out with black people. I had black friends.
Yeah.
And also the majority of them were 50 and 50.
Yeah.
I'm talking about back in 1989. That was a while back.
Yeah.
So I was used to growing up with black people, you know, like hanging out with black people. However, there were some black people that didn't like us, and that's when, you know, like things started getting a little bit tough. And,
how old were you when that happened?
I must have been like 12, 13 years old.
So this is 89, so it's before the 92 riots.
Oh yeah, man, those riots, I was right.
So, but before you tell us about the riots, tell us about the tension that's brewing.
Well, there wasn't much tension between Afro-Americans and Mexicans.
Yeah, at that time.
Because we were the minorities and we would back each other up. At that time, we were fine. I would hang out with Bloods and Crips, and we were fine. You know, black people liked us because back then, 1989, we're minorities.
So I'm a little bit younger than you.
Yeah.
So like, that was when we had a really strong racial divide, and it was like
between blacks and you guys, between blacks and Chicanos.
Yeah.
No,
when
not
you
me.
were younger, that
didn't happen. We were backing each other up.
Okay.
Because we were minorities, and whoever whenever there was tension between a gang member, I'm going into the gangs now, and a black person, obviously, just by you being a Mexican, I would back you up. You know, even if I had black friends, I would always stand up for my people, you know, like the Chicanos.
Yeah.
And I would always, you know, like take their side.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of black people out there who didn't like us, and we didn't like them back. And I don't want to be a gang member. Originally, I don't want to be a gang member because my dad, he set my mind to it. It's like, you know what, Richard? We're here for a reason. I mean, and I don't want you to take the wrong way. I don't want you to fucking get involved.
And that's something that is really important for la comunidad mexicana. Están en Estados Unidos para mejorar sus vidas, ¿no?
Exactly. That's what my dad said.
Yeah.
We're gonna go back to the States to have a better lifestyle, you know. Quiero hacerla, quiero lograrla. You know, I want to make it here in the States.
But what attracted you to the gangs? I mean, I know you're in Florence and San Pedro, but that doesn't mean a lot for people outside, unless you're in LA. I mean, that as soon as you said those two streets,
Florence and San
something.
Pedro. Yeah, that meant the whole thing to you, right?
Yeah.
Well, I was right in the middle, man. I mean, there was no way out. You were either in the gang or you're getting beat up by either Salvadorians. Salvadorians, we didn't used to get along with them at all. You know, like the Mara
I
Salvatrucha.
didn't know that.
Yeah, we would hate each other. I mean,
Okay.
we would prefer to back black people up than a Salvadoreño, even if they were Latinos like
I
us.
didn't know that.
Yeah, that's how bad it was for Salvatruchas. Because
Okay.
Salvatruchas were, I mean, they were pretty.
They're
I can't generalize,
Yeah.
but at least the neighbors we had who were Mara Salvatruchas, you know, for some reason in their country in El Salvador, they felt inferior and they come over here to the States and try to pick on everybody who gets on their way.
Okay.
So if there was a fight between a Salvatrucha and a black, I would take the black side.
But that's your neighborhood, though.
Yeah, right,
They were
right.
still there.
Who was still there?
The MS was still in your neighborhood.
No, there were very few people who were from the Maras. The
Okay.
majority of us were from Florence.
Okay.
We were the vast majority of us were from Florencias, and they wouldn't really, you know, the Salvadoreños wouldn't really mess with us, but we didn't have a good relationship either.
Okay. So it was like a neutral, a little bit negative.
Right. So you want to know how I got involved in the gangs, or
Yeah,
you
sure.
still?
How did you get involved?
Well, as you said, and as I was telling you, I was either out and getting constantly beat up by either blacks or Salvadoreños, or having my homies back up, you know?
And these were all people you grew up with, your primos.
Right,
and all
my
that.
primos and homies from across the street and my classmates, and so we don't really have a choice. Once I recall that my youngest cousin, he comes back home crying with fucking blisters on his feet because he got robbed to his sneakers by the Salvadoreños.
Oh shit.
And he was a little kid, man. He must have been probably 14 years old. Back then I was already 18, and I was already part of a gang. And I got so pissed that and that's when I felt that I had the backup. And that's one of the very few times that I felt that I had that I was proud of being a part of a gang, because I had that backup. And my cousin, he didn't want to be part of the gang. But the circumstances pushed us to it. It was either that, where are you from? Imagine somebody coming up to you, a black guy or a Salvadoreño, or even a person from your neighborhood telling you, where are you from, ese? And you're wearing this badass shoes, brand new, and you're nowhere. Oh, okay, fuck it. So you're an easy prey.
Yeah.
And whereas if they stopped you, and if you looked like a chola already with a shaved head or really short haircut, and somebody came up to you asking you where you were from, and if as soon as you said Florencia, they would leave you alone.
Yeah.
That's how powerful the ganga was. The clicas were the clicas back then. They were hardcore.
And they still are. Yeah.
They still are, right?
Yeah.
I haven't been there in quite a bit now.
Okay, so Florence is the largest neighborhood in LA right now.
It must have been back in those days, talking about early 90s.
Yeah.
That Florencia 13 gang must have been at least 500 members, at least.
So you're part of Florencia and you're in that lifestyle, but for some reason, you come back to Mexico. What kind of brought you back, or what kind of? What was it, man?
Well, unfortunately, as I said it, the whole thing started off wrong with my parents, coming back and forth, because they were going through a divorce. They finally divorced after a long ass time, but then my whole family, my sisters, my mom, the whole family decided to come back. So it was just my dad and I in the States, and I felt so lonely. and I was getting more and more involved in gangs. You know, next thing you know, there were
It
drive-bys.
consumes you. Yeah, like it does.
It does consume you. So I don't know if you ever heard of the drive-bys.
Yeah.
Drive-bys were back then in the 90s. They were pretty popular, and just for being standing out there in the street, even if you weren't a gang member, people who would drive by, like our enemies, our biggest enemies. Sorry to say this, Eddie, 38s, and people, you know, they would fucking shoot at us. And I remember this one time, and that's something that rang my bell back then, because I was kicking it out there with a couple of homies. I was only like, I must have been like 16, 17 years old. I was playing in the arcades in the store. Luckily, there was an arcade in the store, and my homies were kicking it outside, drinking a 40 ounce, a little bit older than I am. And teams drove by, and they pulled out a gun, and they started shooting, and they're like, this is street putos. So they started shooting, and I just, you know, luckily I was inside the store, like playing in the arcade, and all of a sudden a friend of mine comes in limping and bleeding. I'm like, what the fuck? So he's limping, and we had a shotgun in the store, and the owner of the store, he would back us up too. So I'm like, what the fuck? What happened, homie? So it's like, fucking fake. So he walked in, he takes out a shotgun, and I pulled out a gun, and we ran in the middle of the street, and we're trying to catch those. We're trying to fucking blast those 18s in their car, but obviously we weren't able to get it. And my dad finds out about this.
Yeah.
He gave me the lecture of my time. He almost wanted to kick my ass. I don't know if he slapped me. I'm not gonna.
How old were you?
16, 17.
Yeah. When you're in it,
when you're in it,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
So my dad starts giving me this long ass speech about us being in the States and, you know, making feria in the States. And for us to, you know, like, hacerla en grande. Those were his words. And not to go to prison. And then he realized that I started dressing up differently, you know, like short haircut, baggy ass pants, Dickies, Ben Davis. And so he realizes. And then he didn't want to admit it. But then when he found out that one of my best friends was shot in the butt, and I told him that I wanted to go visit him, he's like, why did he get shot? And then he realizes that I'm already part of the gang.
Yeah.
And my cousin, my oldest cousin, back then he was a veterano already. He was one of the main ones. I'm talking about 89. He must have become a part of the gang probably in the 80s, or probably, I don't know, 70, 75, I don't know. But ever since I remember him, he used to be a cholo, already kicking it with the Florencianos. And he told me not to become part of the gang, because he knew what he was in. And so I told him, you know what, I need that backup, man. He's like, don't worry about it, man. Whenever they ask you where are you from, tell them nowhere, and that I'm your cousin, 6'8 Joe, because we used to live on 6'8 Street, and that's what they used to call him in his clica. He was from it was probably the first clica that started the whole movement back in the early 80s. Was Florencia 13 Malditos. Malditos, those are the main ones. Those are the ones that started the whole thing. And he was one of the main members there. So he told me, don't you ever fucking join it. And if you ever do, I'm gonna be asked to give you the cordon. You know what the cordon is, right?
Yeah.
You know, when they jump you for like 35 seconds?
Yeah. So
I did it, you know, without him knowing about this.
Okay.
And when he found out, rather than feeling mad at me, he felt sorry for me. And that's one of the things that rang my bell. I'm like, man, I'm not in the right neighborhood, you know, like, you know, there's a lot of people getting killed, there's a lot of people getting shot, there's a lot of people being put in prison.
A lot. So so you're getting into the time where they're just locking everybody up.
Right. And next thing you know, like, one of my best friends is getting locked up. You know, luckily, I feel that I have like two backgrounds here. My Mexican background, because I was bouncing back and forth, but in the back of my head, I knew that, you know, being a gang member in the States wasn't a good idea. And, you know, like, I always knew it, because my dad buried it in my mind.
Yeah.
We're here to make feria. We're here to, you know, like, you know, venimos aquí a hacerla. That's what my dad always used to say. So, and when when I started being part of the gang, I felt that I was betraying my dad and his goal.
And your family.
And my family.
Sure.
But quite frankly, I didn't have a choice. You know, it was either that or getting the fuck beat up every single day, or at least 2-3 times a week, or getting robbed for my Snickers like my cousin did. So it was life who, you know, like what really forced us to be gang members. Not that fuck it, I wake up in the morning, I want to be a gang member. No, man, we had to use it for protection. And not only that, but I felt that loyalty. A while ago, before the interview, I was talking about how loyalty means so much to me.
Yeah.
Because I was brought up that way.
Yeah.
And we would back each other up. I know, for instance, that if I don't know, if you were in some hot water right now, or if you were in trouble, and you know that I would get your back, and I know that the other way around too. I know you would do the same thing to me, and that's something that people, you know, you don't find that around the corner.
So that's something that, like, it's a little bit difficult because Mexico is beautiful, but like Los Angeles, everybody's struggling in like a zero-sum game to come up.
Right.
And it's like you gotta have the people close to you. You gotta have their back to survive. It's a matter of survival.
Right.
And in like Mexico, there's a lot of beautiful things, but that loyalty, it's different because there's so much competition.
Right.
And it's like if you don't back your people up, they're gonna take advantage of you. They're gonna take advantage of your people. So we fight. We fight for the people we care about. And it's not figurative. It's literal.
Right. Definitely.
And so that's different because life is hard in Mexico por la pobreza.
Right.
But life is hard in the United States because you also gotta struggle to survive in a different way.
Yeah, there's two different ways of struggling. Here, you gotta struggle with the pobreza because you know it's hard to get a job, and like the wages here are very bad. And but in the States, probably wages are a lot better than here. But you gotta struggle because I mean you go through a lot because you know you gotta be part of a gang, man. That's the way I feel it. Even up to now, you know, like if I went back in, you know, like in the times, I think I would still do the same thing, you know, because it was a matter of survival.
So you're like 16, 17, and you have this kind of really hard discussion with your
My
parents
dad.
and your dad, and what you had was that you also had this beautiful environment in Guadalajara. And so you decide to come back to it after that. Is that what happened?
Well, not right afterwards. You know, my life was pretty unsteady because still my dad and my mom were, you know, like going through the divorce process. That divorce process must have lasted about 20 years, you know, like going back and forth before they finally. Not really that I wanted to come back to Mexico. If being honest, I like it over here. But if my whole family had stayed over there, I probably would have stayed myself.
Yeah.
But you know, but then we would come here, and there were a lot of things that I like about this place. You know, you know, people are super friendly. You know, I feel that I've always felt that way. That my heart is divided into two.
Yeah.
LA and Guadalajara.
Yeah.
I love it here. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love it here because of people are super friendly. You know, you don't have to worry about gangs.
Yeah.
That's one of the main reasons. People are pretty warm and welcoming.
Yeah.
And as long as you speak Spanish fluently.
Yeah, there's a lot of discrimination. They don't like hearing Mexicans speaking Spanish. Yeah.
Right.
English.
Right. And
Yeah.
if you do speak Spanish with an accent, at least you've got it made, Rick, because you look half Asian. You know, like your eyes are kind of twinky. Whereas me, I look 100% Mexican, and
I think
on top of that,
Arabic.
because of my beard, huh? But look at my last name, Lopez.
Yeah.
And so it is hard, man. I'm gonna say something stupid, but man, I feel I've always felt that way. Selena Quintanilla, you know who she is?
Nah.
Selena Quintanilla is this Texan singer. Bidi Bidi Bam Bam. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Well, her. I saw her documentary, and I saw a movie where she came out, and in one of the scenes, her dad says, "You know what, Selena? You got to learn how to speak Spanish." Well, she didn't know how to speak Spanish. Her first language is English, and she wanted to be a famous singer. Yet she didn't know how to speak Spanish. So I saw the whole series, man, and I felt so like her because
you wanted to dance.
you better edit that shit. No, because her being Mexican, Selena Quintanilla, that's a Mexican last name also.
Yeah.
And her parents, they were Chicanos, and she didn't know how to speak Spanish.
Yeah.
And she wanted to make it here in Mexico. She wanted to sing, yet she didn't know how to speak Spanish. And her dad said something very important. This is where I feel like her. Her dad said, "You know what, Selena? You got to learn how to speak Spanish well, because here in the United States, we're brown, and Caucasians don't see us like one of them, because we're not white."
Yeah.
And if you go to Mexico and you don't speak Spanish well, they judge you and they criticize you for that as well. So what you got to do, you got to learn your Spanish. And so you got to you got to fit in one of the communities. But now that we're having this interview, I'm glad that I ran into you. And because now I feel that I do fit somewhere, I belong somewhere. Because I'm not Caucasian and I'm not fully Mexican. I am Mexican, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But see what I mean? I was brought up in two different cultures. And I was always caught in the middle.
Yeah, I know.
So when I ran into you, that's something that clicked between you and I. When you just came to Mexico, I know that I got your back because there were a lot of things that you didn't know about Mexico, and people were like turning their back on you because your Spanish sucked. It probably still does. No, it's a lot better. But I know when you just got here,
it wasn't very good.
It wasn't very good, and people would always judge you and criticize you, and they're like, "Oh, look at him. His last name is Cepeda, Ricardo Cepeda."
Yeah.
And just like you, Ricardo Lopez, and you guys pretend not to speak Spanish well. Like, motherfucker, we're not pretending. This is what we are. I was brought up in a Spanglish environment, So every time I run into people like us, I feel that this is really where I belong.
Yeah.
Speaking Spanglish without a problem. And I'm like, okay, there is a community for us. Not 100% Caucasian, not 100% American, but somewhere in the middle.
I think that's something really important that you noted is like, there's a lot of people like us that come from the United States, and they're divided between two worlds, and it's like, we need like a space for us. You know what I'm saying? And that's something I've been trying to work for. And
I'm gonna try to help you with that. I'm gonna try to help you because
people don't understand how fucking hard it is, man.
It is, man.
I don't complain about a lot of stuff, but it's hard. Like, you don't understand how to use the institutions. Like, you come here and there's the court, the RFC,
all that bureaucracy, right?
All that, and it's like, you talk to a Mexican and they're like, "Dumbass, you should know that,"
right?
And you're like embarrassed, but you really need it to survive. Like, they don't understand. Nobody's gonna help help us because everybody expects you to know, and it's like, and I think it's a problem because there's
something as simple as getting your driver's license.
Yeah.
In the States, all you got to do is, I remember my first driver's license in the States. I took a class, I don't recall what it was called, back in high school.
Yeah.
You passed it, you took your grade, you took a driving test and a written test, and there you had your driver's license already.
Yeah.
All you had to do, show your institutional ID, your school's ID, and prove that you had already passed that class. Driving's ed, I think it was called.
Yeah.
Driving's education. I think that's what and that was simple. That's how simple it was. And then I come over here to Mexico. Oh, you gotta get your CUR, You gotta get your birth certificate. You gotta get I don't know, a whole bunch of papers, and then next thing you know. Okay, so anyways, I was saying about that bureaucracy here in Mexico. So I show up to the DMV. I don't know what it's called here in Mexico. What is it called?
Tránsito.
The DMV? Tránsito. So I go to Tránsito and I take my INE, because they told me that's your main ID. So I take my INE. And then I take my birth certificate, I believe, and the CURP. I'm like, okay, I'm all set up. So next thing you know, you gotta make a big ass line. You gotta wait in line for the longest time. And then you show up and they're like, no, necesitas una de domicilio, un comprobante de domicilio. Oh shit, I don't have that. Oh man, you gotta go back home, come back tomorrow. So all that bureaucracy, whereas in the States, everything is done, in seconds. Not that I'm complaining about Mexico, because I like it over here, I insist.
But bureaucracy is tough.
But bureaucracy, man, it's way beyond,
And there's this expectation that everybody should know how to do it.
Right.
But the thing is, even people in Mexico don't know how to do it.
Imagine us. Imagine how hard it gets for us.
So that's what I really
Another example that I have is the birth certificate. When you're born here in Mexico, I don't know what you gotta take, like a witness. When you're born, you gotta take them to a judge, un juez, and register your son under your name, and then you gotta take your own certificate, a birth certificate as a parent.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, a whole bunch of papers. I have 3 kids, 2 of which were born in the States, and the last one, my youngest one, she was born here. Man, it was a hassle to get her birth certificate. They're like, oh, you gotta get 2 witnesses. They're like, witnesses for what? I mean, there's no crime here involved. It's for reals. They're like, tienes que traer a 2 testigos. I'm like, well, ain't nobody committing a crime here.
Yeah.
So why do I need witnesses?
Yeah.
Oh, you need witnesses because they got a witness that they're your daughter. I'm like, man, she's a baby. She's a newborn. So here's my birth certificate. Okay, so anyway, so I got to go through all this process, and the only witness that I have there back then is my mother-in-law. So they're like, you know what? And we're about to shut down this place. We're about to close down. It's already time for us to close down. You're our last customer. So if you don't get yourself another witness, we're not gonna be able to get you your birth certificate, your daughter's birth certificate. So I walk out in the street and we pick up somebody at random. Like, hey, can you be my witness? Like, no, witness for what? I'm like, oh, my daughter, we gotta baptize her, and we not baptize her. We gotta get her birth certificate. All you gotta do is say that you've known me for the longest, and that she's our daughter, and all that bureaucracy, man. Whereas in the States, when my 2 first kids were born, man, it was so easy. My kids are born. The government, I don't know who the heck they sent to the hospital. At the hospital they say, have you got a name for your son? Yes, I do. Okay, what's he gonna be named? Okay, this is my son's name. I want him to be named like this. Okay, so how many birth certificates do you want? I want 2 of them. Okay, they're like $30 each, and you gotta pay off cash. Okay, here it is. And they'll mail it to you. I mean, they what they did, next thing you know, within a month or so, I got my birth certificates at home without doing all this bureaucracy crap.
Yeah.
So I reach you. I know exactly what you mean. And that in many different aspects. For you to get new license plates in your car, or to get the the tarjeta de circulación, you gotta go and all that bureaucracy thing. Whereas in the States, you gotta fill out a paper, mail it. Now it's, back then in the 90s, you had to mail it. The only thing you had to do was mail it, send the document that you were that it was your property, and they will send you a sticker. So anyway, that's one of the few things that I miss from the States. There's a lot of things that I miss in the States, and I wish I could go back sometimes. But then I think about it, and my life is pretty decent down here too. Although we got to go through a lot of bureaucracy, for something as simple as getting a new driver's license, you got to go through a whole process. Whereas in the States, it's a piece of cake. So, yeah, that's one of the downsides of living here in Mexico,
So what do you think about like what advice would you give to someone who is from our background and is returning to Mexico?
Well, I suggest they stay strong, and because it is really hard to adapt. Like growing up in the States and having your whole life in the States, and then moving back to Mexico. Although they're your own blood and stuff, it is really hard, man. It's gonna be a pain in the ass for you to adapt the first couple of years. Because bureaucracy. One of the things that I hated the most was the transportation system here.
Okay.
That is one of the main things one of the main reasons why I wanted to go back to the States. In the States, we've always had a car. I was only 17 years old and I was already driving the freeway.
Yeah.
Whereas here is a bitch to get yourself a car.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have no choice, I do have a choice. I could always go back to the States. I didn't do anything wrong there. I was a gang member for quite a bit, a couple of years. But I didn't commit no crime. I was never put in prison, thank God, and I could always go back. But I got so used to living here that, there's some times when I miss it. I want to go back and stay there for a little bit, and I'm caught in the middle again. So if you are like that, and something that is always gonna back you up here is, having your family down here. I have family here. And the good thing about Mexico is that they befriend you right away. They welcome you. And I guess try to look for people like us, Chicano community.
Yeah.
I'm glad that there's a lot of us down here in Mexico, because I didn't know anybody till I met you, Rick.
Yeah.
And I felt that we were two of a kind. And
we've been friends for like 20 years.
We've been friends for 20 years. Although our lives took different routes. I got married again, and then you got married, and you got another job somewhere else.
Yeah.
But we drift out of touch.
And
but that's but it only takes a call from me to you, or the other way around, for us to get together again. And that's something that, man, I feel it here in my heart. It sounds a little bit pussy from my part, saying that, oh man. But I do feel it that way, man. Like having homies that are like me, and that are loyal. To me, loyalty, man, is one of the main how could you say that? One of the main values that we have as human beings. And so homies, whoever's a Chicano coming down from the States for whatever reason, whether you were deported or you committed a crime, there's people out here that would always back you up, man. Look for us, and I'm sure that Rick or I, would back you up one way or another. And that's something that I'm proud of, like being a Chicano. Being a Chicano is badass now. Although we go through a lot of hard shit, communication aspects, or adapting to one environment or another, or being caught in the middle, and
it's a beautiful culture.
But it is a beautiful culture, man. You could pick the best from two worlds.
Yeah.
What I take from the States is my homies, so they're in the States. Many of them are locked up. Many of them were killed, unfortunately. Many of them, they're veterans from gangs. And my cousins, for instance, he came out of the gang and he made a decent life. He's married. He's got kids now. But what we can rescue from being part of a gang is that, we still have those bonds, like strong bonds that, and the beauty of being here in Mexico is that, there are not that many gangs, and, you don't get jumped that easily in the street. You don't necessarily have to be part of a gang member. You don't necessarily have to be part of a gang. And people here, there's people who, they don't ever mess with you, and they welcome you too.
Yeah, there's a lot of love.
There's a lot of love, yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much for this interview. Is there anything you want to say to anybody?
Yeah, well, The States, man. The States is badass. It is lovely here in Mexico too. Look at Rick. How long have you been here for, Rick?
20 years.
20 years. I've been here 26, 27 years now. Probably half and half my life.
Yeah.
So that's why I say that half my heart is in the States and half my heart is here. And I just want to say, Chicanos, you're not alone. If you ever need to come back, or if you're kicked out of the country, aquí estamos, and we'll back you up, homies.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
All right, you betcha, man.